Hello, and thank you for joining me in this presentation. This is a presentation that has been delivered to the Southwest Tableau user group back in September. I am repeating the presentation today to record it for YouTube because back in September the presentation live wasn't recorded. I will be umming and ahhing, as you can tell, all the way through this because it's been a good few months since I presented this. What this presentation is about is about my approach to the Tableau competition IronViz, and with a particular focus on the visualization that I produced for the feed round 2 and looking at some of the design decisions around what I produced. So today I'm going to be talking about this particular visualization, which is called the Golden Record. And as I just mentioned, this was produced for the IronViz competition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these compositions, some of these design choices, and how I put them together. So this is the Golden Record visualization in its entirety. For those of you who are unaware what IronViz is Tableau's premier competition, and it is a worldwide competition. And the way IronViz works is that you have 3 feed rounds, which are essentially mini competitions, and the winner from each of those 3 feed rounds all get a ticket to go to the main Tableau conference in America to battle it out on stage in front of thousands of people to become the champion. This particular presentation is going to be focusing on feeder round 2. So the feeder rounds, what happens with the feeder rounds is that Tableau release the theme for the round. Sometimes they release datasets to go with that theme, other times they just leave it to the competitors to source their own data. This feeder round was all around music data, and it was announced on the 20th of June, and we have one single month to find the data, look into the data and understand what's there and what stories and analysis you were able to pick from that, and then build a visualization from that. For each feeder round there are 2 judging rounds. The first round is from the Tableau community, so experts within the community that will sift through all of the entries, and they will reduce the list down to 10 that are then pushed forward to the second round of judging, which is judged by a number of experts from the wider data visualization field. So these are people that are not specialists in Tableau. These are recognized experts, people who've written a number of books on this subject. So where do I start with a project like this? What is my approach to IronViz? I feel you need to find some sort of angle when you start off with this. Ideally, that angle needs to be unique. It's a competition, you want to stand out from the rest of your competitors. A strong theme would be preferential because if you're able to theme your visualization to go with either the theme of the data or the story that you're telling, then I think that really helps just tie it all together. So I'm talking of a strong visual theme. Know your own limits is an interesting statement, and with this I mean that you only have a short space of time to pick up the feeder round theme. So in this case it was music. Source your data, find what's inside the data that you've just found. Find what analysis you can pull out from that, and where you can take the story of the visualization, and where you can push it with the design. All of this in 1 month is a lot to do. So my tip is that you don't go into this looking to dive too deeply into a new topic. You'd be very lucky if you found a topic that suited your own personal interests. Music wasn't one of mine, so the idea here is to keep it simple. And obviously you need to have some sort of general plan with where you want to take the visualization, a story that you're aiming for. So hopefully you'll be able to link that in with the data, or your data might lead you in a different direction. My story starts here with a fellow called Daniel Caroli, and back in June in the Tableau conference in Berlin, Daniel and I were watching the keynote of the conference where the Feed Around 2 topic was announced. We came out of that auditorium together, and we stood there discussing, well, what could we do? What are the possibilities? Or at least I was discussing that, because I think Daniel might have well have been a judge that year, or that round. But I was discussing and going, okay, so I want to find something unique. I don't want to do something that's going to be the same as everybody else. I don't want to just go to talk about a particular genre of music or a particular band, or even just listing the top 100 tracks of all time or something like that. Because my expectation is that a lot of people will be doing that. How do you stand out from those people? And of course, I'm talking to Daniel, and this visualization that's scrolling quite quickly is one of Daniel's that he did for Feed Around for IronViz last year. And it was a particularly fantastic viz, and it was all to do with water. And that was the theme. And what he did was he linked it to space, and it was a really eye-catching viz. And so I was talking to him and thinking, okay, what about if there's been music that's sent into space? What if we beamed it? What if we transmitted music into space or something like that? And thinking, yeah, that could be quite a cool sort of take on things. And so I was like, right, I'm having that. I'm going to work on that and see what I can do with it. And that's where it started. So what did I do from there? So straight away I was onto my phone, because the power of the internet. You know, it's all there right at your hands these days. So still stood outside the auditorium, I was Googling. And I found immediately something called a golden record. Okay, they have actually sent music into space, and it went on to 2. And this particular record was on 2 Voyager probes, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, that were sent back in the 70s. This is fantastic. They've sent music into space. Great. And they're still active today, so they're still transmitting. So there's probably going to be some sort of story around that as well. So that was immediately great, because then if I look back at my original sort of ideas of what I want to do around IronViz and a competition, you want to find something unique. Well, I don't think anybody else is going to be producing a visualization on music in space. That's a bit sort of left field, so that should be unique. A strong theme, well, of course, is space. It's going to be very sort of ripe for being themed in a particular styling. Know my own limits. Well, I'm not a big music buff, and I think I would be pushing myself if I was trying to delve into particular genres of music. So all I need to do on this particular visualization is talk about what music has been included and try and delve into what their similarities are, and then I can tell the story of what's going on with the actual craft. And that's that story to have to aim for. So I've ticked all those boxes immediately within a couple of minutes of coming out of the auditorium. Great, I'm good to go. Perfect. So where's the data? Well, this is the other good side of what I was choosing, was that music data, I knew that Spotify have a number of APIs that you can connect to. So sourcing data should be relatively easy, and those APIs will give you all sorts of insight as to what's going on in that track. So if I'm looking at a golden record and a number of tracks, then I'm looking to find what are the differences between those tracks, or the similarities that they've put onto the record that's been sent into space. Great, so I can get that only if the golden record tracks are on Spotify. And I'm in luck. Spotify had an album, the Golden Record, with all the tracks that I verified using NASA website themselves, and also sites like Wikipedia. So there was the 27 tracks on here, that, or 24 songs. There's more. There's 27 tracks on Spotify that I was able to connect to and pull out all of that data immediately. Fantastic. So when I got back from Berlin after the conference, I was good to go. I was ready to step into the API and pull the data out. But before I did that, before I got back, I could start having a bit of a think around the design, around the topic. What could I do with this? So I went into Pinterest. That's my go-to. There's a lot of visualization work in Pinterest and it's tool agnostic. So you're just looking at whatever's interesting you around the design of stuff. So I was searching for the tags music, golden record, space. But the tip is to include infographic into that search, because otherwise you're just going to end up with images or photographs of these topics rather than infographics, visualizations, stuff that you could look at and think, okay, the theming of what you're doing. And I love a good radial. I think for this particular topic I wanted to include one. I think as I was going to be space theming it, I thought a radial would fit quite nicely into that theme. So I was looking at radials. I also went into Tableau Public. So what I wanted to do with Tableau Public was to understand a couple of things. What have other people done around the subject of music previously? I know there's been a lot of music visits before. What sort of stuff have they been pulling out? Have they been pulling out the same APIs from Spotify? Or what did they do with it? How did they visualize it? And has this topic been done before? I couldn't find anything, so great. So it's still unique. I didn't want to repeat or copy anybody else's work in that sense. So finding design inspiration. My tip is it doesn't have to be built in Tableau. As I said, Pinterest is tool agnostic. You can go to places like Behance.com, which has got loads of different visualizations in there, lots of inspiration there. Look for stuff that's built with Illustrator as well. It doesn't have to be data driven. And you could look at the D3, the fantastic stuff that comes out from D3. And I also like to look at movies as well, because movies have very strong theming and styling around them. And you can look at the movie posters, you can look at the credits and the way they do all that stuff. So for me, that's the sort of places I would look for. And what I do is I make a collection of the stuff that interests me, and I bring it into my phone. I save it into folders onto my phone. So I then have this inspiration there ready whenever I want it. Whenever I've got a quiet moment, I'm going to have a little think, I can use it. And one of those that I found was this particular visualization from Nadia Bremer. This is the Ode to Cardcaptor Sakura. And what really interested me about this was the radial lines that were bending around the radial. And those lines are not overlapping. They flow from inside the radial to out. And when you make a selection on either side, either inside or outside the radial, the lines then reposition themselves, going equally clockwise and anti-clockwise around the radial. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I wonder if I could make something like that in Tableau. It's not out of the box, but I might be able to do that, and that would really be interesting, because I know that I'm going to have a number of tracks on this record, and I'm going to have a number of track features that I'm pulling out from the API. So this would be a really good way to link those, I thought. So that's what I did in the end, and that's where we've come to this radial in the visualization. You've got the tracks in the middle, the numbers, going round to a number of plots around the outside, which is all to do with the audio features. And as you select the tracks, then those radial lines move with the selection. Great. I mentioned movies. I love a good Marvel movie, it's good fun, but they're also very stylized. Guardians of the Galaxy Space Adventure, and what I did with this was actually took an element of this and I used it for the title. So I took the font, loaded it into the computer, and created the title, and that was to get that sort of space agey sort of font going into the visualization, and that's where I took it from. So initial composition, I've made some design choices. I know where I get my data from, but I know sort of initially where I want to go with this. And what I've got here is I know what the title's going to be. It's going to be simply the Golden Record. I need to set the scene around what the visualization is going to do with some introductory text, and I've got the radial chart itself to discover what's in the tracks, or what tracks there are on the record. So there's 3 pieces there that I know that I need to place around the visualization. So title, intro, and radial. 2 options that I came up with was the one on the left, which is very symmetrical, centered around the center vertical, where you have the title followed by a little bit of introductory text, which is the boxes that's above the circle there, and then you've got the circle representing the radial, and underneath it some other charts. That all works very nicely, sort of centralized down the middle there. And then the other option was placing the radial to the side of the text and putting the title at the top left, underneath that the introductory text, the radial to the right of all of that, and then underneath all of it some other charts and other information. So this was sort of where I was starting. I could do both of those. The one on the right though, with the radial on the right hand side, is a repeat of one of my visualizations that really went down well in the community, and also one that I'm particularly proud of. And that is utilizing the same sort of concept. You've got the title on the left top with the introductory text below it, and then the radial to the right. So that's where I got that sort of composition from. And the other element you need to think about with this is screen size. I'm going to be producing this visualization mainly to be looked at on a laptop, not a mobile phone. So a laptop is a landscape area, what you would call it, that you'd be viewing things on the screen. The composition on the left looks very symmetrical, would look really nice printed off, where you could see everything, but you wouldn't be able to see in one space the introductory text and the whole of the radial, unless you made the radial a lot smaller or the text a lot smaller. Whereas the one on the right, the composition on the right, you can see the whole radial and the introductory text and the title all in one go, all in one screen. So that was obviously the winner here. Was how was I expecting the readers to consume the visualization? So that sort of won the day with the composition to begin with. So from here, you sort of have an idea of what you want to do. So what I do is then I start mocking, trying to make mock-ups of what I'm going to be working on in Tableau. I start off with sketching. It's nothing better than quick sketches. They don't have to be the most well-formed sketches in the world. Just really quick hand-drawn sketches like this really dodgily drawn sketch. This was just purely jotting down what I felt I needed to do to create those radial lines, trying to understand that sort of element of those radial lines. It wasn't ever for presentation, so I wasn't fussed that it was all not the best sketched in the world. It was done really quickly. I follow that up with what I call wireframing, which is essentially mocking up where you want to go with the visualization using another tool other than Tableau. Excuse me. The tool that I like to use is PowerPoint. I'm quite good at PowerPoint. It's quick and easy. And what I'm doing here is I'm starting to lay out and create that understanding of the composition of the whole of the visualization. I'm using rectangular boxes here to save space, so to keep an understanding of where I'm going to be putting text, where I'm going to be putting charts, how much room do they need, how much room do they need between each other, so they're not on top of each other. And it's effectively my plan of where I'm going to go to with the Tableau. And then you can see in the Tableau version on the right hand side, it's replicating what I've been doing in the PowerPoint. Not exactly, but it's close enough. And this is all to do with iterations, and you continually do this as you work through it to understand, before you get into the technicalities of Tableau, which is a lot It takes a lot longer to build this stuff in Tableau than it does in PowerPoint, for good reason. You've got a real understanding of where you're going to go with the whole composition of the piece. So that's why I use that wireframing. Color composition is obviously important. We're talking about a strong theming here. So my advice, as always, is keep it simple. Gold was used because we're looking at the golden record. So I chose 2 shades of gold, and I used it here all over the visualization, as you can see. So I'm only showing you the top half because it's easier to see than showing the whole visualization. But you can see where the gold has been used. The joy plot down the bottom there has got bands of the different shades to distinguish between the 2 of them. But as a whole composition, as a whole piece, those sort of lighter tones of gold pop out from the dark spacey background. And we talk of space, and I think, well, I want to add some other elements to it and not keep it too boring with just gold and black. So I wanted to make it a bit more spacey. And that particular shade of purple I quite liked. I'm using it, and I'll show you in a second, for creating some sort of nebula type effects. And the teal colour I quite like, that works really nicely with purple. So I like the 2 as a combination. And when I brought that into the visualization, you can see how the 2 distinguish from each other. They're very distinctive, yet they fit with the rest of the piece. They don't particularly clash with the gold in the visualization, and they stand out enough from the dark background. You can see around the radial, the purple areas where I'm using a density plot to create sort of a nebula sort of effect, and then the teal is calling out the particular selection. And that works well. But on top of that, there's one other colour that I was using, which was a particularly light grey, and that's for more subtle elements. And so this is one of the how to read guides, and I'm using the grey to just tone down the chart behind and also some of the text. So moving on, let's get a bit technical and let's look at how did I build this radial. What we are aiming for with the radial, or what I was aiming for, was an inner ring of track numbers. There's 27 tracks, so that's why we've got the 27 numbers going around the radial clockwise. Around the outside there are going to be 12 track features. So these are the audio features around the acousticness, the liveness of the recording, the track recording. But also interspersed between them will be some track details around who the artist was and where they are from and when the track was produced. So I've got an inner ring of 27 points. And I need to connect those points with 18 outer points, which are the track features and the details. So I need to join one inner point with every single outer point. So if you were to select track 1, that needs to join with all the 18 outer points. If I select track 2, then that also needs to join with a different set of lines. So I'm doing 18 different join calculations, 27 different join calculations to all of the 18 points each time. And I need to do this in a symmetrical way, which is the tricky part of this radial calculation. And I need to do it without any overlapping lines as well, so it just makes it even more awkward. So therefore, what we need to do, whenever we select one individual track, because we're going to send 18 lines to the 18 outer points, we need 9 lines to go each way around the radial. So if we connect them up with the lines here, you'll see that 9 outer points are to the left hand side of the track number, or anti-clockwise. They're the first 9 points, so we send 9 lines to those 9 points, and then equally we send 9 other lines to clockwise around the radial to the next 9 points. Now, the difficulty here is understanding what to do and how to calculate this when you're starting to change position. So when you're starting to change the track that you're interacting with, how do you send the lines going left and right? We also, because we don't want overlapping, we also want those lines to therefore go round the radial in bands. So you can see that those lines are not crossing over each other to get to each outer point. They are going round the radial in a band before breaking off towards the numbered radial outer radial point. So like this, you can see the bands there. There are 9 bands per side of the radial. So how do we do this? Well, we need to create a custom data set, and we need to use a lot of mathematics. So it was good fun. It's a radial. Thing to remember with radials is everything is calculated from the center point of the radial, so you're using your trigonometry. So what we're doing here in this particular radial is we're saying, okay, where is position or track 1 from the center point? So how many degrees from the vertical is track 1? And then that's the start point, and then you need to work out where, in using degrees, where are the outer points, the 1 to 18 outer dots, and how do we connect them? So to understand, we need to know which way around the radial each line needs to go. We need to understand which band the line will travel on, where it starts, where it ends, so this is for every single line, where the points reach the band, so it's coming out from the inner point up to the band, goes along the band, and then where does it leave that band. So you need to understand those 4 key elements. And that line, that purple line and the band there, between those 2 teal circles, that needs scaffolding. I think I scaffolded it to 100 individual points so that Tableau could draw it in a circle or in a circular fashion, curving the line round, rather than if I just left it as the 4 single points, then everything would be joined with a straight line, which is not what I want, because then everything would be overlapping each other. So that is the theory on it. But what we got to do is we also need to work out which way round the radial, as I said in the first point, which way round does it need to go from the point that's been selected. So we want 9 equal lines. So if I bring my cursor onto the screen, if you were to select this point, track number 4, you're going to want 9 lines going from track 4 clockwise round the radial, and then 9 lines going anti-clockwise round the radial from point 4. So you need to understand where that start point is, and then determining which band the line is drawn on depends on which point or which feature around the outside is first, clockwise or anti-clockwise. So if we were concentrating on clockwise, the first feature, if I was to draw a line out, would be this particular point here. So what that would mean is that particular feature would be drawn on the topmost band, so the first band. So it would actually come out, and then it would join sort of along a line like that. The next one across would be joining on the second band down, so it'd be a little lower, and the next one would be the third band down, because it's 1, 2, 3 points along. So this is why when you're looking at track number 27, this point, which would have been the first band point for this track 4, on track 27, it says, well, this is the first point, this is the second point, this is the third point, so it's on the 4th band that it joins this one. And it's just writing that maths to say, okay, so we have selected track 4, we need to know that track feature number 4 is the first one that is going to interact with. Track 6 looks like it's number 5. It's going to be the first one it's going to interact with potentially. So it's not always lines up with 4 and 6 with 6. It can change. But what you then have to do is you then have to count it round to 9 and then say when you've stopped at 9, then you need to go the other way and draw the other lines round the opposite direction in the same way. Which one does it come to? So it's quite complex. I'm not going to go into that trigonometry with you here today, but I've got to do that every single track number to draw all those 18 lines for every single track number. So I ended up creating a custom dataset in Excel, and that dataset ended up being 46,000 lines to it. And this is simply just working out an X and Y position to plot those points as I highlighted them, and the intersecting points or the scaffolding points between around the bands. So to bring that into Tableau, once you've got that data set, you can just bring in X and Y. There's no nested calculations in here. It's all been worked out using the Excel, and all I'm doing is plotting those X and Y points. So it is essentially plotting a scatter point, scatter plot. But to draw those lines, I need to bring in the path order onto the path mark, and then that tells Tableau that then you can connect these points that we've just plotted as the scatter plot in a particular order so that it draws the lines as we want them here. You can see that some of the points have been drawn out wider than the rest, and these are to do with the track details, so the stuff around the artist, the year, the country. And what this was, why I wanted to pull these out wider from the rest of it, was because I wanted to add a layer of depth to the radial. So the inner lines, the ones that are not highlighted, the ones sticking out from the radial, those are to do with one element of or one particular chart type, which is dealing with the track audio features. So the valence, the acousticness. The outer ones are different. They're to do with the artist and where they've come from. So they're at a different level on the radial. And there's a good reason why there's one way down on the right, left-hand side, and I'll explain that later. So that's the radial, and that's sort of how it looks when you've squared it all up to make the radial even. And you can see where we're highlighting those same points and pulled them out. So they're pulling out at different elements. So if we go into Tableau really quickly, I can show you sort of what we're doing here. So here's our radial with our lines, and this is how, if you imagine you've got the track numbers in the middle, what I can do with this is I can play this, and you can see how the lines move as you select a different track number, and you can see that the gap opposite where the selection has been made is moving as well, and that is to do with sending 9 lines round one way and 9 lines round the other way. They don't ever meet up round this point. It might be a little easier to see it if I were to put on if I were to put this onto colour. Still onto colour. And it'll look pretty horrific, but you'll get the idea that as it's changing, what's happening. So that is the custom calculations. This is 46,000 lines. I managed to reduce that down to about 20,000 the final day of publishing it. And what this is purely a visual element to connect the track numbers with the features. It's to help the people reading the visualization and make that connection, but it's also to add that little bit of wow, that's visually interesting. I think it adds something really nice to the visualization. And you can see where where you select the track, where the line moves. So if this, I don't know which point this track's on at the moment, but if I was to step it forward to the next track, here we go, let's do it from here. So this track number here, the first outer point is going along this top band here. If I were to flick it forward one more, then the first outer point is no longer this it's actually this one. And so that one which was the last time has now ended up going the other way around the radial, around the left anti-clockwise. So, moving on, what did I place around that radial? I placed a radial jitter, and this is these points here that I'm highlighting. So these are jitter plots that have been jittered around the whole of the radial. It's one chart, but they've been sectioned. So I'm not jittering around the full 360 degrees, I'm jittering around a portion, a percentage of the 360 degrees in each track feature. Inspiration for this came from this particular visualization. I'm afraid I don't know who produced it. It's one of the ones I found on Pinterest. It's a pretty poor image quality, but what I liked from it was I liked the effect coming out from the outside of the radial with the circles. It's quite hard to see on screen, but I don't know who did it, but that was where it sort of came from with the jittering of the radial. Because I did originally have them repeating those circles going in a straight line like this is, but I decided that it was better to jitter them like this. So each jitter plot, or each individual section of the jitter plot, has 27 stars in it, and those stars represent each of the 27 tracks. So each of the radial jitter plots has each track represented in them, and they're plotted on a range of 0 to 1, which is the Spotify normalization scale. So 1 being that that track has more of the particular audio feature, so it could be loudness. 1 could be the loudest tracks, 0 could be the quietest tracks. Behind each star is a secondary chart which is showing the density plot, which is using the purple colour to try and create a sort of a nebula effect. So when a selection has been made on the track, on the radial, that track highlights in the teal colour star, and it displays the density plot of where the other stars used to be. So it was just that interaction of saying, well, this is your track that you've just selected, and this is where it fits with everything else that was on the record. And I thought that worked pretty well, and it kept within the theme of the visualization. And then from there, I was able to produce analysis to understand the grouping of those stars and find why or where the highest number of tracks were grouped in certain audio features. And that's why I produced this. This isn't on the front display of the visualization itself. I wanted to keep that very clean. I'll go into that later, but this was hidden away that you could bring up and understand what the analysis is within the radial itself and the tracks that are held on the golden record. So this is how it looks when you select an individual track, and what happens is those stars highlight for that individual track, and the rest of it is density plotted, and then you get a nice image of, I think this is Beethoven, because that is one of the tracks, it was by Beethoven. How you do a radial jitter, or a sectioned radial jitter as I've called it, that is something that I created. And the only blog on that is at Tableau Magic, and that's the link there. So it's all within one worksheet. It's my own calculations for working out how to radial jitter that within sections. There are other radial jitters that jitter around the whole of the radial, but not in sections like this. I have used this in a working environment as well, with data posters at my own workplace, and visualizing certain elements around 12 months of the year. So you'd have a radial jitter per month, and that went down really well. So iterating is something I touched on earlier, and the iteration part of this process is really important. This is where you need to take, or what I do is I take images of what I've just produced, and then I make a change, and I'll take another image, and then I'll look at those two images next to each other and decide which one I like. Did I like it before I made the change or after? And this is how I keep on track with my visualization, keeping to my theme. So if we sort of remember I'm just talking more in this whole presentation around how I like to keep, or how I do design compositions and focus on that element rather than technical. So this is a starting point that I'm going to just showcase. This is a bit of an earlier sort of element of the visualization, where on the radial jitters you'll see that I'm using circle marks rather than a shape mark. So what I decided to do was I decided to iterate it and go, well, what happens if I make them stars and use the shape mark? And I played one versus the other and I went, okay, there's potential there. I kind of like it. It might fit better with the whole theming of the dashboard. So we're looking at these marks here. So I thought, yeah, okay, I like it. Let's work with that. Scrap the other one and then let's work with that one. So that's the one I'm now looking at. But they're a bit bright. They're a bit overpowering for that radial. So I toned them down a little bit. I resized them. I turned down the opacity on them a little bit, made them a little bit more subtle. Still strong enough that you can see the individual stars in the jitter plots. And I thought, yeah, okay, I like that. I'll keep that. The next element is a bit harder to see, and we're talking here about the radial lines. The radial lines on the left are gradiated on colour from inner to outer. The radial lines on the right hand side are dual axis, so have a line within a line. The idea between that was to try and create almost neon effect with the lines to make them a bit more futuristic. Now that did work in the fact that I could make that futuristic looking with a stronger colour like the purple or yeah, like the purple tone. But when you're viewing it from this sort of distance on the laptop, it was kind of lost on you that they're actually lines within lines, and it was sort of neon. When you zoomed into it, it kind of worked. So I didn't actually keep the one on the right. I left the one on the left as it was, even though this scrolling will tell you that I've kept it. I haven't. Because you see on this one, I've gone back to the radial lines being gradiated. But on this particular view, what I've done here is I've changed one of the charts. So I've changed this chart down here, and the reason I changed that was because the one on the left was another jitter plotting. It just looked disconnected from the radial. I wanted to I decided to utilize the axis on the chart to join it up with the line that was coming out from the radial to make it feel more like part of that chart. So that's what I did. So then I joined it up with an axis, and I liked that. Then the other part of the iteration piece is you need to understand what happens to the composition when you're interacting with it. So when I've made that selection, how does it look when I'm using different colors? So you can see on this one that you select the track number, see a picture of Chuck Berry, and then you see the lines have changed in color to teal color lines coming out from the radial, and then you've got the density mark showing. But at this point I've gone with I haven't changed the mark color on the stars. They're yellow. They don't show up as well as the teal version. And that's how you do that iteration, or that's how I do it. I make changes and I look one image to the other, and how I compare them is I bring them into my phone. I create myself a little folder where I save all my images. This is great, and this is a really good tip, because what you do then is you've got these at your hand throughout the day. Throughout all the time. If you've got 5 minutes away from work or whatever, you can just quickly have a scroll through your phone, flick back and forward, you know, using your thumb on your phone, and then you can check sort of before and after. You'll be constantly making those sort of design choices, not so much technical choices, but design choices on the fly as you do it, as you're just going through your day. And so that's what I did, was I brought in lots of images, and you can see there most of the images are quite similar, and that's just where I've been changing things, looking at just adding elements to the whole visualization. Another major chart on the visualization was the joy plot. I'm not going to go into saying how I made the joy plot, because it's not a technical presentation, but that's the joy plot down there highlighted. And what I did with the joy plot was I went into another level of detail on the tracks. So the radio was telling me a little element around sort of the musicality of the tracks, and the joy plot, sorry, is going a bit more of a deeper dive into those tracks and seeing if there's any interesting detail. And what I did with there was I was using Spotify API around the pitches of the track, and those pitches, you get 12 pitches per track. And what I'm doing here is looking then to see is there any shape to those tracks? What can I tell about those tracks? Is there any similarity between tracks? So I would be able to choose two different tracks and see how the shape's changing or looking similar. But why would I use a joy plot? And this is all back to the composition piece again. When I was laying out using the PowerPoint, where I had the space, what space I could utilize, joy plot wouldn't be the first thing you'd think of when making a visualization, but it is a very good one for maximizing or minimizing your vertical space. The default would be to use an area chart, which tells you exactly the same information, but the area chart doesn't overlap like the joy plot does, although that is overlapping. Never mind. What would happen with the area chart is it would take a greater vertical space up on your visualization. And I also was finding that it was just becoming too dominant if you're using that. So if I went back to the joy plot, then I can compress it vertically, still have the same information, still use a bit of opacity on the areas so that when they overlap, you can see the overlapping, and but still get the same detail of the analysis out of it as you would with the area chart. And so this is going back to that composition to show where the rectangular boxes in the center would be holding that position in my composition. So the PowerPoint was what I was aiming for. I had something a lot smaller in mind, but the Tableau sort of area there, the teal, was what I ended up having. So if we fast forward to the final visualization, I'm going to go through some other elements that are not quite immediately apparent on here. So there's some hidden analysis and hidden detail into this visualization, and I'll go into why I've hidden it later. So I've got, there are markings on top of each of the records on both Voyagers, and those markings detail how you would play the record, how you could understand if you're an alien race and you've picked up the record, what do you do with it? This is the NASA scientists deciding this is the best way. These are the actual images on top of the record. This is the best way that they could visually represent on how you would play the record if you were new to it. Whether or not it would work, I'm going to hold my tongue on that. But that was available by selecting an icon there that's highlighted, and that's using the show and hide containers feature in Tableau. And this is all using show and hide features. So this is a how to read on the radial chart. So I'm using that subtle grade to take away the stuff that you don't really need to look at, and this is explaining how to read that radial chart, and you can get to that using the icon up there. The next icon up there is telling us the analysis that we're seeing with the clustering of the tracks in their musical composition, and that's found up there. You can also play the music, so even better, you can select a track and go, well, that's great, I've never heard of it, but what does it sound like? You can use a link into Spotify, press play, and off you go, and you can listen to the actual music on the golden record. Wonderful. And another how to read visualization hidden away using the show and hide containers, and that's for the joy plot. It's all fantastic, using that show and hide containers element to just take away the stuff that isn't really necessary to show on the visualization to begin with. And that's the reason for that is all around white space, maximizing white space on my visualization. So anybody who has been learning Tableau will have heard of white space. It's part of the stuff that you get taught early on, And what white space is it's just building gaps between your charts and your text on your dashboards for work or whatever. So you don't clutter your visualization, your dashboard, with too much information where charts are competing for your attention. Building white space around them will ease the cognitive load, your visual sort of attention on the different charts. So white space was something I was very keen to keep on here. A lot of Iron Viz visualizations are really heavy on analysis and text, and I find them very hard to consume. I must admit, I don't always read half the text that's on there. Even this one, I think there's too much text. But what I wanted to do was still have that sort of element there, because it's a competition, you've got to tick those boxes, can't just be about design. But I was hiding away some of that element using those containers. It's still there, you can get to it if you want to understand more and learn more, you can get to it. But as a visual sort of composition, I wanted to keep that white space. And I was able to identify the white space by taking the image out and boxing it up. And this is something that I like to do at the moment, is just to understand how much of my visualization I would deem white space. And these are the main areas where I thought this is where I've been building in white space. And you could see that what I'm doing here is I'm separating charts, separating the radial from the joy plot and the text from the bar chart down the bottom. You can do a quick simple calculation using Excel to work out how much white space is contained in your dashboard. I've got 40% of the visualization is white space, made up by those boxes and that outer banding. So that's me sort of trying to understand, am I overloading what I'm doing here? And so taking those boxes away, and then you can sort of see how they line up to the actual visualization. Rule of thirds is something very interesting. It's used in photography, and it's just one of those design principles that you may have heard of. And rule of thirds is essentially sectioning your picture, your photograph, or your visualization in these instances into 3 sections, vertically and horizontally. So you end up getting 2 lines coming down in the middle of the visualization and 2 lines across. The idea is that you're supposed to be putting the most interesting elements, or the stuff that you want to be focused on those lines, or ideally around where those lines intersect. So you can see the radial is on the right hand vertical line coming down, and what it also does is it helps to for you to compose the visualization. So this one's composed into those 3 sections. Horizontally, you've got the initial bit with the introduction and the radial discovery. Then you've got the second section with the joy plot, which is all about the detail, and the third section, which is talking about the golden record, its travel and its mission, and what would happen in the future if we were to send new music. And you can see how that all sort of fits within those sectioning vertically and horizontally, splitting it into thirds. You can see the title and the introduction element is all within one section itself. You can use rule of thirds again within each section. You can continually do it infinitely if you want to. I would be lying if I said that I did this. I didn't. It just happens that the golden record sits on one of those sections at the top, the title I'm talking about here, and I didn't go into that level of detail on the composition, but it is there if you want to do it. Other design choices in here to talk about is the map. That's your sort of default map that you get with Tableau sometimes. It's very heavy sort of colour-wise. Obviously I could choose subtler colours if I wanted to, but I wanted to keep with the main colours at the right density of them. I didn't like that when I put that in there. It was too overpowering for the visualization. It was it was just attracting your eye away from the radial and the data going around the radial. So that's why you can see it's an early version, because I've got the circle marks on the jitter plots above it. So I changed that to use the new feature with layers in Tableau 2019.2 with the vector maps. So I used one of the layers to create that wispy effect, and I thought that kind of worked well with the spacey nebula type sort of effects I was creating above it. So I quite like that, and I kept that, and it was less dominating and it fitted with the radial around it. Other design choices to talk about is the flow on here. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a flow from the top to the bottom of this visualization. And what I like to do, and if other people have seen it in other visualizations I've done, is I use lines to take you through. And so what I've done here was, with one of the lines coming out from the radial, I was drawing it down to the next stage of the visualization, which was the detail element, and then from there down to the more of the looking forward section. And that's just a visual sort of cue to, you could follow that line down, takes you down through it, and it connects them up. But what I also was doing was, these are GIFs, they're not running here, but they're GIFs that run on the actual visualization. I was adding story elements to these lines. So this was, we've talked about the track detail and the track musicality, what's in the actual Golden Record, but there's a wider story around the Voyager probes being sent into space. So I wanted to add little elements where you can click and discover stuff about those Voyager probes, so that you could watch the launches of both probes by clicking on that icon. You can watch live footage of Jupiter rotating, not live, recorded footage from those probes of Jupiter rotating, which is really, really fascinating. And that's a GIF that runs as you go down through the story, and this is all in sequential order to the travel of the probes. So you can see they've been launched, they've gone past Jupiter, and then they go past Saturn, and again that's footage from the probes going past Saturn. Then you see Saturn slowly moving. But also those probes now have entered interstellar space, so there's an element of story around that as well. They are still transmitting, they are still working, but they have left our solar system, and or the helisphere, and they've entered interstellar space, which is the first craft to do that. But they're still transmitting, so there's a story element there with some text and another image that you can open up and see what's going on there. And then I talk about that a little bit further at the end of the line. So you can see the flow. We're talking about the tracks and the detail and the musicality on the tracks and what was selected to go on the record, but we're also talking or showing a flow of story down through the visualization. More design choices. What happens when you select on the record? How does it look? How does it react? Again, when we come to the end of it, it's using those colors to pull out and to highlight, so the flow changes color when you've selected something, and it was just doing that. So we're getting to the end of this now. Remember that it was a competition. It's not just let's have fun with design and discover stuff. It was a competition, so I had some scoring. My first round scores was fantastic. If you remember, this is from the Tableau community, the Tableau experts, people that understand the tool. I had some really high scores there. So I went through to the final 10 from, I think there was over 100 or so entries this round, and I was selected into the final 10 with some fantastic scores. I had less fantastic scores from the second round judges, the external people. Initially, when I saw that, I was like, "What?" But then I discovered that quite a lot of people were judged quite harshly by the external experts, and I also was given comments from both judges from the first round and the second round. I'm not sure how many judges judged. It could be, looks like it could be 2 points. Since there's 2 bullet points, maybe 2 judges per round. But the first round judges were a bit more popular, or not popular, a bit more enthusiastic around what I put together. The second round judges a little bit more critical. They found the text hard to read, which isn't a surprise, as I was using custom fonts that were loaded into Tableau as images, so they're never the sharpest when you do that. And they're very difficult to get spending time messing about with changing text in one piece of software to then save it as an image and then bring it into Tableau and see if it fits the space that you're trying to work in, and does the text read right, and if you've got spelling mistakes you have to go back and fix it and do it all again. So I'm not surprised by that. And that's it. That's the golden record. Thank you for getting this far if you have, and if you haven't, well, sod you. I hope you enjoyed it, and it gives a little insight into what I do, or what I have been doing with IronViz. Hopefully I will compete again next year. So if you have got to this via the Reflections in Design site, then it'd be good if you could leave any feedback on there. Thank you very much. Goodbye.